I'm honored, I'm flattered, I'm delighted that Vin has asked me to come and share with the Tennessee and the Memphis annual conferences. This is it's a great treat for me to get to do this. I was in North Carolina just a couple of weeks ago, and it's always fun not to have to get on an airplane to arrive at one of these. And I just drove up I-40 and apparently just missed the wreck and got in front of it. I bring you greetings from Arkansas, and all I can say about this apportionment payout is I hope someday those of you in Tennessee are doing as well as those of us in Arkansas. So we just kind of leave it at that. I do want to acknowledge a couple of folks quickly and then get into what I know I'm here to do. I'm particularly pleased today that David Lewis was able to be with me. David is a member of the Memphis Conference, as most of you know. He joined Horizons about 9 years ago, is now one of our vice presidents, and has just been an absolute incredible joy. We've been very pleased that 2 bishops so far have appointed him to Horizons. We hope a third will continue to do that. We still need him. And so do so many churches that he's serving incredibly with great effectiveness all over the United States. So, David, thank you for being here. You all produced a great resource in stewardship in the Memphis Conference. And Herb Mathers, sitting over here on my left, as so many of you know Herb out of Nashville, the former head of stewardship in the Methodist Church, and the man that I shared, the first book that I wrote was co-authored with Herb. Which means that Herb wrote almost all of it and just let me put my name on it, but has been incredibly gracious to me as I began this new ministry in stewardship. Herb Mathers has been a mentor to me and gracious at every step of the way. So Tennessee Conference, those of you who share Herb, thank you so much for that. Thanks for all you've done, and he's now taken all those gifts to Africa and is doing most of his service over there. Today, tonight, tomorrow, I want to talk to you about changes that we need to make in the arena of stewardship. And if we don't, all of the evidence says that we are in enormous trouble. Book that I wrote some years ago, entitled Not Your Parents' Offering Plate, that's, available out here along with another. And I understand you can now buy the one that's coming out in 2 months. If you want to pre-order it, they'll give you a discount, et cetera, et cetera. Please do. I get 75 cents for every one of those that you purchase. Not Your Parents' Offering Plate got its title from the old Oldsmobile commercial. You remember Oldsmobile was struggling along. They used to be one of the largest automobile sellers in America. They woke up one day and they looked around and they realized that most of the folks buying our automobile are over the age of 65. That may not be a good sign for future business. We'd better start attracting younger folks. They had 2 choices. They could come up with a snazzy slogan, or they could remake the car. They chose the slogan. And they just figured all those 30-year-olds just couldn't wait to buy a Delta 88. When they were doing that, my father-in-law only drove Delta 88s. Every 3 years, he'd go get a new Delta 88. It is the last car on the planet I would ever want to drive, because that's what the old folks drove. So they decided on a new slogan that was going to be called, "It's Not Your Father's Oldsmobile." That's before they realized women bought cars too. And 3 years after they started pushing that slogan, "It's not your father's Oldsmobile," Oldsmobile ceased to exist. Went out of business. There hadn't been any more Oldsmobiles now for some time. Now, what I want you to hear me say is that the United Methodist Church and our percentage of market share line looks exactly like General Motors. General Motors used to sell 60% of all the cars in America. Religion used to get 60% of all charitable dollars in America. And just a few years ago, as you know, General Motors appeared before Congress on bended knee and praying hands saying, if you don't give us some money, we're gone. They were down to 19% market share. Today, giving to religion stands at 32% of market share from one time 60. America quit choosing Oldsmobile, and Oldsmobile never changed. And America is ceasing to choose the church. And the church had better change. And we're going to discuss some of those changes. And I hope that I can impact you with an understanding that what we have done in the church is to do stewardship just like the Delta 88. We're still doing Christian financial stewardship the same way that our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers did. We're doing it like they did it in the 40s and 50s and 60s. We're doing it like General Motors for decades sold cars. Their approach to selling cars was, we just have to tell them it's a General Motors car and they will buy it. And we have continued to basically say, we're the church, therefore you have to give to us. Well, why? Because we're the church. And we haven't been able to get beyond that as the last couple of generations have looked at us and said, why? What's in it for us? And we've watched market share go like this without changing. Right after I started Horizons, began to work with churches, I was surprised when nonprofits came to me and started to say, would you mind coming and spending some time with our board or with our people? Share some of the things you did at my church. I thought, well, golly, I guess so. I was mistakenly under the impression that, well, nonprofits have got to be just like the church. I figure that there's not much difference. My whole background was Methodist ministry. It's what I knew, but shoot, if I know that, I'm sure I can do Habitat, Boy Scouts. It's all got to be the same. What I realized where the big difference was that the persons running those nonprofits, unlike myself or any of my preacher friends, had an understanding of why people give. Imagine that. They wanted folks to give, therefore they asked the question, why do they choose to give? It would have helped Oldsmobile if somebody would have said, maybe you should ask those 30-year-olds what it is they want in a car, why they're choosing this or choosing that. When I got into nonprofits, I said, why'd you put this newsletter? Why does it look like this? Well, because we understand why our donors are choosing it. Everything they did was centered around why people give. It was something I never thought to ask for 20 years as a Methodist preacher. Why do people give? And it's something we've got to understand today. Now, this little survey done by the Gerald Panis Company has been done for years, in which they put out a variety of reasons for why people would give. And they continue to ask the question, please note the number 1, number 2, number 3 reasons why it is that people give. I used to ask when I was doing these seminars, can any of you guess what's number 1? I'm not going to do that because some of you have actually already read the book. And you'll answer the question, you'll look really smart in front of your new bishop, and you're not that smart, you just read my book. But the number one reason why it is that America said nearly 10 years ago they choose to make a gift and continue to this day to choose to make a gift is their belief in the mission of the institution. They actually believe that lives can and will be changed by the dollars they give. And that's what they want to see. And what they have been saying to you and me for a long time is, we're not so sure we're getting our money's worth in the church. About 3 years ago, I was in Kansas City. I was working with a church. The pastor and I were recruiting his campaign team. We'd been there most of the morning seeing persons one after the other, and pastor would invite them to serve. I'd tell them the job, and most of them were saying yes because we thought we'd done a pretty good job as pre-screening who was going to be asked, and out they'd go. Well, the next lady that was due in I thought was a slam dunk. This lady had been the previous chairperson of the board. She and her husband were the second largest donors to that church. They had been members there for nearly 20 years. And I mean, it appeared to me they have bought in hook, line, and sinker. They're good to go. So I told the preacher, look, when she comes in, introduce us quickly. Take a minute, introduce me for just a second. Don't take long. Ask her to serve. I'm going to tell her quickly what the job is. She'll be out of here in 10 minutes because we're getting a yes out of her. And you and I can have another cup of coffee. Well, she came in. Preacher did as he was told. Sat there, introduced us quickly. She sat down. I was seated here. The preacher was right there, and she was in front of me. He quickly asked her about the job. He said, Clif will explain it to you. I shared with her just enough as to what I thought it'd take to get a yes. Sat back and waited for her to say yes. Well, I'm always kind of conscious of body language. Some of y'all ever look at that? Like if it's Sunday morning and somebody's over there going, that probably means you're not going over well with that person. Well, this lady was seated in a love seat, and she was kind of on the edge of it, which I interpret initially as this is a good sign. She doesn't want to stay long. Well, after the preacher had asked her, I explained the job, she scooted back in the seat and crossed her legs. Uh-oh. She's going to stay a while. She turned and looked at her preacher. Said, Pastor, I thank you for, inviting me to serve. I appreciate it very much that you thought of me. I've had some discussions with my husband about this, knowing I was coming in here today. We've really been looking deeply at what this campaign's about and the money that we need. You know that we have supported this church faithfully for years. Always appreciated our friends here, etc. She said, lately, we have also begun to send money to World Vision and to Oxfam. She said, I've been very impressed with those two organizations. They're really making a difference, and they're affecting and changing some lives, and it's gotten us pretty excited as we have read reports of what all has happened. It's been a wonderful journey for us to support them. At the same time, I've been looking Sunday after Sunday at our church. It seems like almost every week I see a lot more gray hairs or no hairs. When you have that children's moment, I don't see the numbers of kids coming up that I saw just a few years ago. Preacher, when was the last time we baptized an adult at our altar? Well, I guess all of that got my husband and I to wondering last night, is this church really the best place for us to give our money? I'm wondering if you can respond to that. And she shut up. And I was sitting over there listening to this, and I went, oh my gosh. And then I thought, this is going to really be good. And I watched the preacher. Well, he had his legs crossed, and then he crossed them this way, and he crossed them back that way, and he was kind of getting comfortable in his seat, and and he started talking. He said, now, well, first, let me just, I'm just thankful. I'm thankful for you and your husband and all that you have. You mean so much to me and so much to our church, and I'm just grateful you take time to come today. And I'm also so thankful that you would feel like you could share this with me, and you could tell me. Those two they're fine organizations. What you're doing, I just don't have any problem with that, and I really appreciate that you all would want to give. It's so Christ-like, and it's just an example of what your life has always been like, and I've witnessed it over the years. And you ask a very good question. Why should you give to the church? It's a good question, and I'm thinking Clif could help us with this. And I'm sitting over there, and I'm just going, oh my gosh. And she kind of looked at him, and then she looked at me like, I really don't want to hear from you. I know who you are. You're a short-timer here. You're not the pastor that's assigned here. You're not the leader of my church. I kind of wanted to hear from that person as to why money should go there. Well, I've sort of, I didn't want to look at the preacher and say, I ain't got anything to say. So, I've sort of fumbled around with this or that and tried not to make him look too bad for sending it my way. But there was no reason to talk at any great length. I finished up, and she quickly stood up, and she thanked us both for having her here. And she said, I'll share this with my husband, and I will call you back in the morning. And she left. The preacher, bless his heart, he was standing there and he looked at me. He said, well, you think she'll serve? I said, Lord, no, she's not going to serve. She's going to turn you down. But preacher, what she just did was she framed for you the question you have got to learn to respond to if you have any hope of success whatsoever in this campaign effort. I said, you've got to put that together as to why it is this church, your church, her church deserves her investment as to what you're going to do in the future to change lives and make a difference. And he was just, and then he looked at me and he said, does Horizons have a template on that? He wanted a template for God's vision for His church. Well, it was a sad effort. A sad effort. But my friends, that is the question that the people in your pews, if they haven't asked you directly, are thinking deep down. And if you can't convince them that you can change lives in a better, fuller, and more meaningful way than some other place, the issue will not be that I'm not going to give. The issue will be I'm not going to give to you. You've got to learn to make your case. And it's something most of us have yet to learn to do. It's still just the church, therefore you should. Now, the second chief reason why it is that Americans repeatedly say they choose to give is the regard for staff leadership. It matters who's in charge. It matters as to who's running the show. It matters as to their confidence in the person helping make the decisions to move that church in a direction that they want to invest in. Do they have the confidence in that person to help get it done. Now, who is the number one person in our church who singularly has the ability to make the greatest difference, be it for good or bad? They're a little shy. I thank both of you for that answer. It is the pastor. And yet, what do we do in the majority of our churches when it comes to money, fundraising, relating to donors, making the case?
Send the stewardship chair.
We try to keep our pastors in one corner and all about money in another. We don't want our pastors to have a clue as to what the donor base looks like in the organization they are responsible for running. And that is stupid. It's absolutely stupid to think that you're to run an organization and you have little or no clue as to the intricacies of the revenue stream of that organization. That makes no sense. And yet we take great pride in most of our churches in doing that. George Barna said in his survey that 26% of all Protestant clergy in America know who the donors are in their church. 74% don't know. Now, we wondered about that in Arkansas. Bishop Crutchfield asked Horizons to run a survey several years ago of the 500 and some odd Arkansas pastors and see where they stand on a variety of stewardship issues, this question being one of them. Do you know or have access to the donor base of the church? And we found out in Arkansas that it was 26%. And then it was split almost in half between churches that would not allow the pastor to have access and pastors who have chosen not to have access. Well, Bishop Wills heard about it and he asked us to do the same in the Memphis conference. Some of you may have been here years ago and filled one of those out. We did. David helped us, got that done. We got it scored. And the interesting thing, almost 500 clergy. Again, Memphis conference, Arkansas, very similar kind of in size, but ours must be a lot harder to operate because we have just one bishop down there. And you guys can only take a half a bishop in one conference, a half a bishop in the other one. You got to be a lot easier to work with than the Arkansas clergy. But we found the exact same ratio in Memphis. About 26% of the clergy, Methodist clergy, said they had access. Exactly the same. I made the assumption, if it's that way in Memphis, it's that way in Arkansas, I'll bet you that's pretty close all across Methodism. For some reason, we think that's smart. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about that a little later tonight. But folks, one of the dumbest things we can do is to continue that kind of policy. It makes no sense. There is not a college in America that would hire someone to run it if that person said, you know, I'm the greatest expert in all the world, but I really don't want anything to do with raising funds for our nonprofit called this college. They would not hire that person to be president of that college. Nor would the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the YMCA, the Habitat for Humanity, or any other nonprofit, because they know that without adequate funds, they can't do their mission. And somehow, in some crazy way, we have conjured up that the mission and money need to be separate in the church. And that makes no sense. So when it comes to the number one reason, changing lives and telling the stories of how it is we change lives, the number two reason of the involvement of our chief executive officer with our donor base, those of us in the church are by and large doing it 180 degrees wrong. And then you look at the third chief reason why it is that people give. And the third one is the fiscal stability of the institution. There's only one nonprofit that I am aware of that loves to air its dirty laundry to its donors and basically say over and over, we're going to go broke if you don't. And who do you suppose that is? It is the church. We have conjured up the idea that crying wolf and telling everybody we're going to go broke is a great way to raise money. The exact opposite is true. There is not a nonprofit in America that would be sharing that with their donors because they know what that does ultimately is it decreases giving. For instance, how many of you want today to invest in the Costa Concordia? Just think about it. You'll remember the cruise ship that's sinking. Folks, if we don't give a lot of money, that ship's going down. It's going in the ocean. Let's raise money for the Costa Concordia. Not too interested. That's the message we give about our church Sunday in and Sunday out. We believe that the more we cry wolf, the more they'll step up and respond. And what that does over time is it basically convinces donors, you know, the other places I'm giving don't seem to tell me that they can't manage their money. They're not telling me that they're about to go broke. They just keep telling me how they're doing their mission. They just keep telling me stories of how they've changed lives. But my church is always about to go under. You know, I'm just wondering if the church is the best place to give my money. Because saving a sinking ship is not what I want to do. And yet that's the message. How many of you pastors have been to a finance committee meeting and they're looking over the results and they basically say, preacher, you got to get up Sunday and give them hell. I mean, you got to tell them how bad it is. You tell them, next Sunday, if offerings don't go up, no air conditioning. We're shutting that sucker off. We give it 3 weeks, youth minister, out of here. Folks, y'all better start giving because we going down. That's the message a whole lot of preachers hear from their lay leadership because they believe, preacher, the more you get up and cry about it, that'll make them really want to take their wallets out and just throw them up on the chancel. Maybe once, maybe twice, but Sunday in and Sunday out and year out, what begins to come across is maybe this is not the best place. Not the best place. What we need to be sharing with our folks are how we are changing lives. Every newsletter I see from the nonprofits that we've worked with over the years have an opening statement of how they've changed lives. You go on their website, it's not a pretty picture of the executive director. It is a story of how they've done their mission. It is a child in Africa. It is a house that they built. They are describing how they've affected lives. You go on to websites of the United Methodist Churches in these 2 conferences. What do you see on the front cover? You read a newsletter that comes out. Is it a story of how Johnny came to know Jesus? Of how he went forth from that impact of Christ in his life to do this or do that, etc., etc. That's not what I see. I get newsletter after newsletter, emails from various churches that we sign up for, and I got to admit, I'm getting less today than I used to. A lot of people have taken me off their list. But the newsletters I see, First Methodist, UMW, going to be having a bazaar on Saturday. We really hope everybody will come to the bazaar. We do it every year, and the money goes to the UMW. The UMW takes the bazaar money, and they use it like they have used it before, and they intend to do that again. Y'all really should come. There'll be lots of trinkets and prizes and some good things for all of you at the bazaar, and we think everybody should come to the bazaar for the UMW. And That's what we're doing. And while you hear the Methodist men, they're having a manure sale across the street. Go over there and you can fertilize your gardens. You read this junk. You know, that's what I see. I see these kind of announcements. And I'm looking. Where's the store? Where's one life changed? Just one. Just one. Just tell me one. I haven't seen it yet. I'm still looking. I'm still looking. And then they do something real stupid. They'll put a little box, in the bottom of the newsletter. Amount of money we expected. Amount of money we actually got. How bankrupt we are. I mean, boy, that turns me on too. Just gets me so excited. I can't wait to go join me a church that's about $50,000 in the hole, because I've got $50,000, couldn't figure out what in the world to do with it. I'll just bail this church out. Why do we do that sort of thing? When it comes to sharing that we're fiscally stable, that we're doing a good job with your money, by and large, the church is doing it 180 degrees wrong. We got some big changes to make. Peter Drucker, a quote, I put it in the book because it really stood out to me. Peter Drucker is now died, but boy, this was brilliant to me when he said, a business has discharged its task when the customer buys the product, pays for it, and is satisfied with it. All right? Governments discharge its functions when its policies are effective. Yeah, that hasn't worked out real good lately, but the nonprofit neither supplies goods or services or control. This is us. This is us, the nonprofit. Our product is not a pair of shoes. It's not an effective regulation. Our product is a changed human being. The nonprofit institutions are human change agents, and their product, secured patient, a child that learns, a young man or a young woman grown into a self-respecting adult, a changed human life altogether. That's what you sell. And when you put the sign out there with a cross on it, people rightly interpret they are changing lives for Jesus Christ. That's what the sign means. I'm going to go in there and see how that's being done. And when they see it, and they experience it, they will give to you. And when they don't, they won't. You see a sign that says shoe store, you walk in there, you can't buy shoes. You give them money anyway? Nice sign, here's $50. That's what we expect in some of our churches. You do your job. You change lives. You'll get the money. So the reasons they give, again, a belief in the mission, regard for staff, and the fiscal stability or responsibility of the institution. Let me suggest this. How many of you are in a finance committee here? Any of you? We got some ladies. Oh, good many of you. Good. I know what y'all do. You meet with that line item budget, and at some point, you say, well, we're behind, and it's August. What can we cut? Y'all been there? Let me make a suggestion to you at your next meeting. And that's all it is. It's just a suggestion. But instead of saying, what shall we cut? Why don't you say, I understand there's 3 chief reasons why people give in our church. How well are we telling our story of how we've changed lives? Maybe we need to relook at that and look at our newsletters, our bulletins, the testimonies we have or don't have. Do people understand how we're affecting lives? Are we involving our pastor and key staff with our key donors, or are we keeping them in the dark? Are we communicating that we are fiscally responsible, or are we always giving people the impression that we're going broke and going under? If you change those 3 things, you might not have to cut anything. Notice, if you would, this graph that exemplifies part of the problem that we've been ignorant to. until 2011, and I'll explain why this one's a little short, you will note that every year the number of nonprofits in America has increased. And it goes back to when they first started counting them. Until 2011, there'd never been a decrease. The reason that dropped was the IRS declared in 11 that every single nonprofit must file a 990 tax return. Got to, or we're shutting you down. And 200,000 of them didn't. So they took them off the books. And that's when you saw the drop. Next year, it'll go right back up. You'll be back on par. Now, here's the interesting thing about this, though, that I want you to note. Back in 2002, there were about 370,000 churches in America. 2012, there's 370,000 churches in America. We haven't grown a lick, but the competition has grown substantially. The number of people we compete with for that charitable dollar has grown substantially. And yet we continue to issue the same message as if the competition was still the same. And it's not. It's not. Gifts to nonprofits. Notice in 2000, for about 5 years, giving to nonprofits was roughly flat. All the while, the number of nonprofits was growing. You have more folks chasing the same dollar. We had a little growth, 06 and 07, and it started down again, and it is pretty much flattened out again in 10 and 11. So while the money has been pretty flat, the number of those seeking that money has been on the rise. And we have not adjusted our communication. We don't know how to respond to a donor who says, I'm thinking about giving to World Vision and Oxfam or whoever else. And God bless them for at least mentioning it, because all our folks are doing it and few of them are telling us about it. So tell me why, when I've got this same amount of money and I've got multiple choices, why you? And the why us is what we have not learned how to share. Here's where money came from. Almost $300 billion in 2011. You'll note that the majority of that came from individuals. Almost 81%. You got individual giving plus bequest giving. You know, a bequest gift, that's an individual gift. Y'all understand that? We die individually. I share that quickly with you because I hear a lot of churches say, well, can we get some of this foundation money? Can we get some corporate money? You know, will Ford give us some money? And da-da-da-da-da. And the answer is generally no. But don't sweat it. 81% of all charitable dollars in America come from folks who sit in our pews. They're average folks. They're sitting out there as individuals. That's where the majority comes from. So don't worry about 19%. We have access to the majority of the charitable dollars in America. Now, here's where it was distributed. You'll note quickly, you look on here and say, well, if some of you kind of in the back and you're as old as I am, you can't read that, but that says religion in that big section right there, 32%. So you're staring up at that and you're thinking, well, shoot, that idiot from Arkansas, he don't know squat because we're getting most of the money. I mean, we're smoking number 2. Education just got 13%. We're cleaning their clock. What's he griping about? Here's my gripe. A few years ago, just about 20-some years ago, you took this same graph of where charitable gifts went, you took religion and you started down, and you just kept right on going. All of this has now left us. America isn't choosing us anymore. And that's the concern. then this really stood out to me when I saw this the other day. They noted where 15% of all the charitable dollars were going. 15% of it came from persons who gave $1 million or more. These are major charitable investors. They really look hard at where it's going. They make up 15% of all charitable gifts. Pretty important. As they examined where I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck, because it's a lot of buck, what do I choose and not choose? Education, medical, arts, culture. This is like United Way, human services, more education, environment, international, religion. 2%. Only 2% of those major donors pick us because they're the most discriminating of all donors. And they're saying for $1 million I ought to get more than I think I'm going to get. So I'm picking something else. That should worry us. And why do they stop giving? In the same article, same study at Indiana University, they said the biggest reason I ceased to give as a major donor was that I lost the personal connection. The number 2 reason why people give, regard for staff. The one thing we try to keep our pastors out of, and we think that's smart, and major donors are saying, if I hadn't got confidence in who that person is in a relationship, I'm not going to give like I could. Many, many times I've heard, oh, people don't give to people in the church. They're giving to Jesus. Well, I wish that is true, because if they were, I'd have another job to do. But I don't know about, it may come as a surprise to you, but a lot of people don't love Jesus like they should. And their reason for giving is channeled through the person that is telling them about Jesus, and whether they have confidence in that person or not. And this idea that those persons need to learn to ask for that gift is incredibly important. We found out in studies that if someone will ask a person for a gift versus sending them a letter and sort of suggesting it, but actually sitting down and looking at them and asking for the gift, the amount of the gift goes up 42%. Now that's a big number. Some of you lay people are in business, I would assume. Some of you own a business, run a business. Anybody in here do that? Own a business, run a business? One lady in the back? Just one boy. What kind of business do you own or run? You're a CPA. Well, they don't count. They're not really human. Different kind of folks, but I should have known. Where? Yes, sir. Assisted living. Okay, where's another one? What?
I'm a United Fund, so it's like United Way.
You're United Way. Run United Way. What I'm saying is true. God bless you, ma'am. Thank goodness. So afraid somebody'd say it wasn't. Let me suggest that those of you responsible for a business, if I was running a business, and I do, and I saw that if I do this, my profits are going to go up by 42%. If I read that if I dress up in a chicken suit and dance on the sidewalk, my profits will go up by 42%. What do you think I'm going to do? No, I'm going to hire somebody to get a chicken suit and dance on the sidewalk. But we're getting in the suit because I care about the return. 42% if we'll learn to ask. It is so funny. I hear so many clergy, I just can't ask somebody. I just can't ask them. It just blows my mind. Why? Well, I think I'm just afraid of rejection. Let me remind you, clergy, you get rejected every Sunday. Of all the nonprofit professionals in America, you ought to be used to it. Gifts to religion. Now, I couldn't take this as far back as I wanted because the slide's only so big, but I took it back to 1991. Gifts to religion were nearly 50%, 47.7 is what that number is. I just want you to notice the trend. Gifts to religion. In the 40s, drops into the 30s. Finally, it has hit its lowest number in the 30s at 32%. It has never been this low before. Last year, there was one charitable subsector that decreased. All other charitable subsectors increased, but one last year. And it was to religion. America chose to give more to every group, with the exception of us. Well, but it's not your father's church. We can change the slogan, or we can start changing the way we do business. But the trend is General Motors. Now, one thought is that we could go before Congress and ask for a bailout. But my guess is that ain't coming. From either the Republicans or the Democrats, it ain't coming. George Barna. 2011, the number of Christians who tithe is down to 4%, the lowest recorded level ever. Folks, I'm looking for good news here. I'd love to come bring you a lot of good news, but there's not a whole lot about the trends we're looking at when it comes to giving. This chart, and again, I don't know how well you can see it in the back, a lot of numbers, and let me interpret this for you, because this is a powerful chart. Very seldom, like once every 15, 20 years, do they actually study the income levels of those who belong to a denomination and what they give. It's real easy to say, oh, they got 1 million members and they give blank, and you can do the math. But what do those 1 million members actually earn versus what they give as a percentage of what they earn? This survey done in 2009 did that. What it shows is, on top, the Mormons are the number one givers, giving right at 91% of them give on average $4,000, and they give away on average about 5.2% of what they earn, 4.7 of it to the church. The number two group, the other Protestants, this is your independent churches. It's the Saddlebacks, Willow Creeks, Fellowships, New Lifes, that body of, quote, non-denominational groups, are the second largest donors. The Pentecostals and Assemblies of God are the third largest donors, and it begins to really drop off the Baptists and the Jews, the Episcopals, the Presbyterians, the Methodists are now giving to their church an average of 1%. 1%. But there's good news in this. We cleaned up on the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes. They come knock on your door, you look at them and say, we gave 0.3% more than you did. Not much good news in that. But when I look at it, my first question, what's going on here? That would have two groups, and let's take the Mormons and the Assemblies of God. Those groups give 3 to 4 times what we do as Methodists. What is it about Mormons and Assemblies of God that you would suppose they have in common? And they would absolutely croak if they heard they had anything in common with each other. But what might you figure that they would have in common? Core values. Keep going. I'm looking for a certain word. You're right, but missional. What? Fire. Fire. Passion. Okay. Holy Spirit fire. I got you. Belief. Witness. There you go. That's my word. Are you lay or clergy? Clergy. Tennessee or Memphis Conference? Tennessee. You win the prize. What appointment would you like? Okay. Several of you were very correct, but I want to hit on this expectation. Mormons and Assemblies of God have very high expectation of what it means to be a member. And they make it very clear on the front end. Very clear. Both of those groups will have far more people in worship on a Sunday than they have on the roll. You go talk to an assembly of preachers. How many did you have Sunday? 700. Wow. How many members have you got there? 425. Woo. What's the deal? 425 have risen to the level of saying, I am ready to be a disciple for Jesus Christ. I'm ready to marry into the body of Christ. The others are still, working to get there. But we have shared with them our expectations, and they're not quite ready to commit. Mormons, the same way. They make it very clear. Both groups would say, we expect a tithe. We expect you to be in worship every Sunday that you're healthy and able. And we expect you to be in service in the community outside the walls of this church. Yes, ma'am?
I'm in the LDS, Latter-day Saint Church, from the time, of course this is one of their issues, from the time boys are very young, they are taught to save their pennies for their mission.
Yes.
And they are expected to pay for their own mission, which is 2
That's
years
right.
normally overseas, even though they are giving of themselves that entire 2 years. So it really imprints on them.
It's an incredibly high expectation. So, if you or I wander over there and said, we think we want to be Mormons now, they will share with you these expectations as one part of the whole. Now, I look at that as a United Methodist and I start thinking, what part of high expectation is not Wesleyan? What part of this would John Wesley not like? This same guy that gathered them in a circle and said, we'll start with you. What did you give this week? How did you serve this week? What did you do for the poor this week? We're going to have an accountability session. I've got high expectations. You want to be called a Methodist? What part would not be Wesleyan? And what I think has happened is that over about the last 50 years, we have lowered the expectations of what it is to marry into the body of Christ we know as the United Methodist Church to a level that people are real happy to meet. 1%. And I see it Sunday after Sunday when I go around to different United Methodist churches. We hadn't had a bishop in Arkansas in 20 years that would let me have a church by my own anymore. Got a new guy coming in next week. I'm going to talk to him Sunday. I'm taking him to the Razorback game. We're going to have a chat. I'll let him know I don't want one. But I go to a lot of churches. And I'll see somebody coming up to join. Not in very many, but a few. And they're singing this last hymn. Blessed assurance. And here comes somebody. And they get down, the preachers, they come up and he puts their arm. Folks, I am just delighted to share with you that Sally Jones has come to unite with our church today. Now, Sally has already been baptized. And so we're going to just bring her right into the church today. Now, Sally, we have just one question to ask you. Why do we put that just in there? I hear it all the time. What does that imply? It's no big deal. Will you be loyal to the United Methodist Church and uphold it with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and? Hallelujah. You know, I was so grateful 4 years ago when we voted that in, because a million Methodists hit the sidewalk and started testifying just as soon as General Conference said you could do it. It was amazing. But anyway, Sally is sitting there and she's hearing these questions. And she's just kind of looking at the preacher, and I'm sitting over her and saying, your answer is I will. I will. Sally, we are so glad to have you folks. Sally's going to walk to the back, and I hope you'll come back and greet her and welcome her into the church. And Sally's a member. And about 3 months later, it's the second Sunday of October, which is the Sunday the preacher has to talk about money. And so he gets up on that Sunday. And he says, all of you pledge to God in front of this altar, every one of you, that you would support this church with your prayers and your presence and your gifts. And Sally's back there going, when did I do that? Oh my God, why is he mad at me? And that's the first time Sally suddenly heard there was an expectation of her. And we wonder why Sally doesn't give 10%. We wonder why Sally's not serving in the community. We wonder why Sally is just coming up to have chit-chat in Sunday school and going home. It's because we told her that it's no big deal to marry Jesus. I don't see that in the Bible. I don't see Jesus saying, come and follow me. It's no big deal. You know, I used to give to couples that I was marrying a little book. It was a great little book, and it was entitled, Marriage is for Grown-Ups. And I'd say, y'all need to read that, because if you're not grown up and ready to commit to someone other than yourself, you don't need to be married. I dare say that most folks joining the church, the United Methodist Church, don't really understand they're committing to follow Jesus, not self. And we've made it easy. If we want to turn around giving, if we want to turn around the church, we've got to turn around what we're sharing with folks about the expectation of what membership is. Many years ago, I had the great I got a free ticket from the United States government to Iraq. Along with the 1st Armored Division, I deployed in the Gulf War to do battle with the Iraqis. We were the lead element that crossed the border in this left hook that did the tank battles with the Republican Guard. But many of you will remember that when we initially crossed the border, we were greeted by the Iraqi army how? Who remembers? What'd you see on TV? Yes, sir. Hands up. They surrendered. We crossed the border and they jumped out of their trenches and said, we quit. They were wearing an Iraqi uniform. They had an Iraqi soldier ID card. They had an Iraqi rifle. But they did not want to fight. And they quit. They quit. I mean, we had an unarmed scout helicopter with one guy in it radioed us in the back that he was holding 150 Iraqis hostage with a .45 automatic. He flew over, they quit, he landed and held his pistol out there. We went through the Iraqi army in 3 days, as you know, on the ground, and the war ended. Because we were committed to the fight. The American service men and women were committed to the fight. I think what we've done in the United Methodist Church in too many occasions is we have recruited the Iraqi army. We have let them put on a uniform, we have let them carry an ID card, and then we said, now, it is time for us to do battle with a world that is not on our side. It is time for us to take on society that wants to harm those we should love, that wants to allow what should not be allowed. We must march against it, and our people have said, I quit. I don't want to be in that fight. And many of them were surprised we'd even ask them. Because we just said when they joined, you just have to answer this question. We should never allow anyone to unite with the church without insisting they go through a series of classes that explains the expectations that we have of someone who wants to marry Jesus. And you're thinking, oh my God, the church will really suffer. What you're going to look like is a little church in Ohio called Ginghamsburg. A New Start preacher called Mike Slaughter has a little church in Tip City, Ohio. Mike only has 1,600 members. Y'all think, shoot, my church bigger than that. But Mike has 5,000 on Sunday. Only 1,600 have so far gone through the classes of what it is to be a member of Ginghamsburg Church. One of the highest giving, serving group of United Methodists in the country. But no one joins without going through a series of classes called Following Jesus. That's where we've got to go. High expectation churches grow, and low expectation churches are dying. Lyle Schaller found that out in one of his studies. People are actually leaving the low expectation place and going to the higher one. Okay. I'm going to hold up right here before I get into something that's going to really get me in trouble. We come back tonight, I think it's at 7, Vin, am I right? At 7 o'clock. I'm going to finish a few minutes of this, and then I'm going to shift from trying to convince you that we got a problem. Are you convinced? Yes. We got a problem. I'm going to share with you some answers to fix it. Don't be late. We'll be back at 7. Thanks for your time this afternoon.